We were taught how to read a person through a single blink or a sudden shift in breathing. But there is no manual out there that prepares you for the shock of decoding the ruthless smile of your own mother. The air inside the $1 million Northern Virginia mansion was thick with the stench of expensive vanilla candles and the clinking of crystal champagne flutes, but I was suffocating. My lungs had completely locked up in a severe airway spasm, a lingering souvenir from my time overseas last year. I collapsed onto the Persian rug, clawing desperately at my own throat to fight for a pathetic gasp of oxygen. But the sheer horror didn't come from the lack of air. It came from the exact moment I looked up. My mother wasn't panicking. She didn't yell for help or reach for her phone to call 911. She just stood there towering over me, casually smoothing out a crease in her silk dress. She checked her watch with dead eyes, patiently waiting for me to lose consciousness. She needed me to collapse in front of 50 high society guests. She needed them as witnesses to the crazy, unhinged veteran daughter so she could legally throw me into a psych ward, strip away my human rights, and swallow every last dime of the blood money I had sent home. She was absolutely certain she was silencing a weak, broken victim. What she didn't know was that she had just lit a match right next to a powder keg, and the shadow of federal investigators was already swallowing this house whole. I am Lauren Kennedy. Tell me where you are listening to this story from down in the comments. Hit like and subscribe. Because the trap I set in that hospital room the very next morning didn't just clear my name. It ground their entire fake plastic empire into dust. The tape recorder on the table emitted a high-pitched mechanical screech. The small room smelled like stale sweat and burnt coffee sitting in the pot since yesterday. Fluorescent lights overhead flickered, buzzing like an angry wasp. 2 federal investigators sat across from me. Neither of them smiled. One of them slid a thick manila folder across the cold aluminum table. It stopped mere inches from my hands. 7 shell companies, 14 fraudulent loans. My forged signature plastered over high-interest real estate contracts. Hundreds of thousands of dollars borrowed under my name vanished into thin air. I didn't blink. I just stared at the black ink on the white paper. I kept my breathing even. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. They gave me 72 hours of emergency leave, a ticking clock hanging over my head. Find out who stole my identity and drained the accounts, or take the fall. Lose everything I had built and face a federal judge. 36 days before I ended up gasping for air on that Persian rug, I stood on a porch in Northern Virginia. A faded canvas duffel dug into my shoulder. I didn't recognize the property. The peeling siding of my childhood home was gone. In its place stood a bloated, garish McMansion painted a blinding, sterile yellow. The front lawn was perfectly manicured, cut to a precise height. The old gravel driveway had been paved with fresh, pitch-black asphalt. I pulled my old brass key and slid it into the deadbolt. It jammed halfway. I tried to jiggle it. Nothing. They changed the locks. I squared my shoulders and pressed the doorbell. A woman I had never seen before, wearing a crisp gray maid's uniform, opened the heavy oak door. She eyed my clothes, her gaze lingering on my boots with blatant disdain before stepping aside. I walked in, and the sickening stench of expensive vanilla candles hit the back of my throat. It was suffocating. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a harsh, glittering light over the spotless foyer. I stopped at the edge of the kitchen. The counters were covered in pristine, dark granite. Sitting dead center was a shiny $1,200 Italian espresso machine. I looked down at my scuffed steel-toed boots. My faded cargo pants were permanently stained with old grease and dried dirt. I spent the last 3 years, thousands of miles away, eating dry, chalky meals out of foil pouches in the blistering heat. I slept on hard cots. I took cold showers. I wired every single cent of my hazard pay back to this exact address so my family could survive comfortably, so my aging dad could finally rest. This was where the blood money went. Granite countertops, frosted milk, crystal glass. The espresso machine suddenly hissed, spitting a thick cloud of hot steam into the quiet room. I took a step backward. The heavy heel of my boot crunched against something on the hardwood floor. It was a crumpled ball of paper carelessly kicked under the edge of the kitchen island right next to the stainless steel trash can. I crouched down and picked it up. I walked over to the cold granite counter and smoothed the wrinkled paper flat with the palm of my hand. It was a notice from the local pharmacy. Bold red letters were printed across the top margin. Final warning. My father's heart medication had been officially cut off. The account was 12 weeks past due. Not a single payment had been made in 3 months. The muscles in my jaw clenched tight enough to crack a tooth. A sharp physical pain shot through my chest, heavier than any weight I had ever carried. The thousands of dollars I bled for every month hadn't gone to his pills. They went to the chandelier hanging above my head. My calloused fingers curled inward. I crushed the pharmacy notice into a tight fist until my knuckles turned completely white. The house was dead quiet save for the low hum of the expensive refrigerator. I slowly turned my head toward the closed double doors of the living room. It was time to say hello to my mother. I pushed through the heavy double doors into the living room. The air in there was suffocating, thick with the smell of fake vanilla and expensive furniture polish. Sitting dead center in a massive cream-colored armchair was a ghost. My dad. A wet, rattling wheeze leaked out of David's chest with every breath he took. His skin was the color of wet ash. His ankles bulged, swollen tight over the tops of his mismatched socks. On the glass coffee table in front of him sat a cheap plastic pill organizer. The Monday to Sunday compartments were flipped open. Every single slot was completely empty. He stared down at a folded newspaper. His hands shook so hard the pages crinkled, but he didn't look up. He didn't dare look me in the eye. I remembered the morning I left home years ago. He hugged me so hard his tears soaked right through my collar. Now he was just a broken hostage, rotting in his own living room, surrounded by luxury he wasn't allowed to touch. Light footsteps tapped against the hardwood stairs. Maria floated down. She wore a deep red silk dress that caught the light from the chandelier. Jessica trailed right behind her, clutching a designer handbag that cost more than a used car. Jessica chewed her gum loudly, looking at me like I was a stray dog that had wandered through the front door. There was no warm embrace. No fake smile. Maria stopped at the bottom of the stairs. She held a crystal glass of dark red wine. She didn't look at my face. Her cold eyes darted straight to the dried mud flaking off my boots onto her spotless floor. Her upper lip curled in pure disgust. I didn't speak. I walked straight to the glass table and slapped the crumpled pharmacy notice down right next to the empty pill box. Maria barely glanced at the paper. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, letting the dark liquid stain her lips. She didn't deny stealing the money. She didn't make a single excuse. She just lowered the glass, pointing the crystal rim directly at my chest. You keep the direct deposits hitting my account, Lauren," she said, her voice dead flat. "Or I pull his oxygen tanks and dump his dead weight in a state-run nursing home by Tuesday morning. Try me." A thick blue vein throbbed against the side of my neck. My fingers twitched, brushing against the seams of my pants. Every muscle fiber in my body screamed at me to cross that room, grab that fragile crystal glass, and crush it to dust. I could end this right now. But I couldn't. I needed a rock-solid paper trail for the federal investigators, not a domestic assault charge. I swallowed the bile rising in the back of my throat. I forced my spine to curve. I slumped my shoulders forward and dropped my chin, staring blankly at the floor. I played the exact part she wanted to see, the beaten, submissive daughter who knew her place. Maria smirked. She took another sip of wine, thoroughly satisfied with her victory. I turned my back on them and walked away. I dragged my boots heavily up the carpeted stairs, keeping my head down until I reached my old bedroom. If you have ever had to bite your tongue and play the fool just to protect someone you love from a toxic family member, you know exactly how heavy that moment feels. Hit the like button and subscribe to my channel if you're standing with me. And tell me in the comments, what is the most ridiculous thing a toxic relative has ever demanded from you? I read every single one. I stepped into the dark bedroom and pushed the door shut. The deadbolt clicked with a loud metallic snap. The second that lock engaged, the defeated slouch vanished from my posture. I stood dead straight. I dropped my canvas bag onto the floor and ripped the heavy zipper open. I reached past the folded clothes and pulled out a battered Panasonic Toughbook. I flipped the thick screen open. In the corner of the room, a small black internet router sat blinking a steady green light. I stared at it, my calloused hands hovering over the cold keys. The submissive daughter was gone. 2 in the morning. The massive house was dead quiet save for the low rhythmic hum of the central air conditioning. I sat cross-legged on the cold hardwood floor of my old bedroom. The blue glare from the Panasonic Toughbook washed over my face, casting long, sharp shadows against the peeling wallpaper. I typed. My calloused fingertips moved over the plastic keys, making a soft, continuous clicking sound. Getting past the home internet router took exactly 11 seconds. I just typed in Jessica's birthday. Typical. The shared network drive opened on my screen. I bypassed the main folders, vacation photos, recipes, digital receipts for designer clothes. I dug deeper into the hidden directories. There it was. A locked folder buried inside a submenu. The title was One Word Insurance. My jaw tightened. I clicked it. A grid of PDF documents and JPEG images populated the screen. I opened the first file. My stomach dropped like a lead weight. It was a medical evaluation. A fake one. The name at the top of the header was mine. The signature at the bottom belonged to a private psychiatrist I had never met in my life. I read the bold print near the margins. Severe, violent, post-traumatic stress. Unfit to manage personal finances. Danger to self and others. My mouth went completely dry. I clicked on the next file. Images. Staged photos of the living room. A wooden dining chair smashed to pieces against the drywall. A shattered glass vase on the rug. Maria had wrecked her own house and taken pictures building a paper trail to frame me as an unhinged, violent threat. I opened the final PDF. A drafted legal petition for a full medical conservatorship. She didn't just want my bank accounts. She wanted the state to declare me legally incompetent. She was preparing to lock me inside a psychiatric facility, strip me of my basic human rights, and take total control over my life, my body, and my money. I would become her property. My chest heaved. The air in the room suddenly felt too thin to breathe. I highlighted the entire folder, compressed it into a zip file, and attached it to a secure encrypted email. The address line was already filled out. The federal investigators were waiting for exactly this. All I had to do was hit enter. I raised my right hand. My index finger hovered directly over the worn plastic key. One keystroke and the feds would kick down that heavy oak front door. Maria would be wearing handcuffs by tomorrow afternoon. She would rot in a federal prison. My finger trembled. I swallowed hard, trying to push down the massive lump in my throat. My eyes drifted away from the glowing screen. Sitting on the edge of the dusty wooden nightstand was a small silver picture frame. I stared at it. It was a photo taken 24 years ago. I was 8 years old wearing a cheap yellow sundress. Maria was kneeling on the grass holding me tight against her chest. She was smiling, a real, genuine smile. I stared at that faded photograph, and for 5 excruciating seconds, I wasn't a hardened adult. I was just that 8-year-old kid in the yellow dress, desperately wanting my mother to love me. I wanted to believe this was all a mistake, that she could be fixed. I held my breath. I hesitated. 5 seconds. That was all it took. A shrill, high-pitched beep sliced through the silence of the house. It came from the wall right next to my head, Jessica's bedroom. A cheap third-party network monitoring software. Jessica must have installed it to track the Wi-Fi data usage. My mass file download had just triggered a security alert on her desktop. The alarm shrieked again, louder this time. My heart slammed against my ribs. I slammed the Toughbook shut, killing the blue light instantly. I ripped the power cord from the wall. Total darkness. Out in the hallway, the floorboards creaked. Heavy, frantic footsteps pounded against the carpet, rushing straight toward my bedroom door. 6 in the morning. Pale gray light filtered through the tall hallway windows. The house was completely silent. I walked downstairs, my boots making no sound on the hardwood, and pushed the door to my father's bedroom open. The brass handle felt like a block of solid ice in my palm. I stopped in the doorway. The bed was entirely stripped. The heavy mattress sat slightly crooked on the metal frame, exposing the bare box spring underneath. Gone. The bulky metal wheelchair wasn't sitting in its usual corner. A faint, harsh chemical smell of cheap bleach hung heavily in the air, a lazy attempt to mask the lingering scent of old sweat and sickness. I looked down at the floor. Two deep parallel indentations were crushed into the thick fibers of the beige carpet. Wheel tracks. I followed them with my eyes. The heavy grooves rolled straight out the side door, leading directly into the attached garage. She had moved him in the middle of the night. I found Maria out on the back patio. The crisp, clean morning air was completely ruined by the rich, heavy smell of expensive dark roast coffee. She sat comfortably in a woven wicker chair. Her perfectly manicured finger casually swiped across the glass screen of a silver iPad. I stood in the sliding glass doorway. I didn't yell. I didn't throw my hands in the air. My jaw locked so hard the muscles in my neck ached. "Where is he?" I asked. My voice was just a flat, low hum. Maria didn't even look up from her screen. She took a slow, deliberate sip from her ceramic mug. A perfect, utterly fake smile stretched across her face. "Your father needs a change of scenery," she said smoothly, her eyes still glued to the glowing tablet. "He's resting at a special private care facility, a very exclusive place. It's incredibly peaceful there, Lauren. They don't even have cell phone reception to disturb the residents." My stomach tightened into a hard knot. I knew exactly what that meant. An unregulated, cash-only home. A place where old men were locked behind heavy doors and pumped full of cheap sedatives until they forgot their own names. She had completely isolated him. The sliding glass door rattled on its tracks. Jessica walked out from the kitchen chewing loudly on a dry piece of toast. She held a black floor-length silk evening gown pinched between two fingers, holding it away from her body like it was a dirty shop rag. She tossed it. The expensive fabric slid across the glass patio table and pooled near the toes of my scuffed boots. "Mom is hosting a cocktail party tonight," Jessica said, licking melted butter off her thumb. 50 guests, a welcome home celebration just for you. Wear that, brush your hair, try not to embarrass this family for once." I looked down at the dark silk resting on the concrete. I understood the game immediately. Maria didn't want a family reunion. She wanted a stage. She needed 50 high society witnesses holding champagne flutes to watch the unstable daughter lose her mind. She was building her medical case right in front of me. I didn't argue. I didn't say a single word. I reached down and picked up the dress. The smooth, delicate silk caught on the rough, cracked calluses of my palms. I gave Maria one last dead look, turned around, and walked back upstairs. I walked into my bedroom and locked the door. I dropped the silk dress onto the floor like a piece of trash. I walked over to my canvas duffel bag, reached past the folded clothes, and dug my hand all the way down to the bottom corner. My fingers brushed against a cold, hard piece of plastic. I pulled out a cheap, prepaid flip phone. A burner. I popped the plastic back off, slid the battery in, and turned it on. The tiny screen lit up with a harsh green glow in the dim room. I punched in a memorized number. The line rang twice. A deep, gruff voice answered on the other end. "Yeah." I stared at the locked door. "Evan, wake the guys up. I need you to find an address. 7 o'clock. 50 people crammed into the living room. The air was thick with the smell of roasted nuts, expensive cologne, and the sharp, bright clinking of crystal champagne flutes. Laughter bounced off the high ceiling. It was a perfect plastic showcase of Northern Virginia wealth. I stood pressed against the hallway wall, suffocating inside that black silk dress. It felt like a straitjacket. My hands hung empty by my sides. I kept my eyes moving, scanning the faces, tracking Maria's movements through the crowd. I was looking for a slip-up. Any clue to where she had hidden my father. Maria floated through the room, playing the perfect hostess. She laughed at a joke, patted a man's shoulder, and then drifted straight toward me. The bright smile never left her face. But as she leaned in close, pretending to fix the collar of my dress, her voice dropped into a venomous whisper. "You look ridiculous in this," she hissed, her teeth bared in a fake grin. "You smell like cheap dirt. You really thought leaving home made you special? You're just a broken stray." She wanted me to snap. She wanted me to yell, to flip a table, to give these 50 people a reason to call me a lunatic. I didn't move a muscle. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. I stared right through her, my face a wall of solid stone. Maria's eyes narrowed. Words weren't going to break me. She needed something else. She took a sudden step backward. She threw her arms up slightly, faking a clumsy stumble on the edge of the Persian rug. She shifted her entire body weight onto her right foot and brought her designer stiletto heel slamming down directly into my left calf. The sharp metal spike of the heel dug straight into the deep indented scar tissue on my leg, the exact spot where hot shrapnel had ripped through my muscle 2 years ago. A blinding flash of white-hot pain shot up my spine. The fragile skin tore wide open. Hot blood instantly soaked through the thin black silk sticking to my skin. The sheer shock to my nervous system triggered a violent physical crash. My lungs locked up. I collapsed. My knees hit the hardwood floor with a heavy thud, and I crumpled onto the patterned rug. I couldn't breathe. My airway seized completely. I clawed at my own throat, my nails dragging across my neck as I fought for a single, pathetic gasp of air. My vision tunneled. Around me, the loud chatter died instantly. 50 people stopped talking. But not a single person reached out a hand. The high society guests just backed away, pulling their expensive shoes away from my blood. They looked down at me with cold, disgusted eyes. To them, I wasn't a human being suffocating on the floor. I was just another damaged burnout having a mental breakdown and ruining their fancy party. If you have ever been kicked while you were already down by the exact person who was supposed to protect you, you know how deep this betrayal burns. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you understand this kind of pain. Let me know in the comments, what was the most hurtful thing a family member ever did to you in front of other people? I read every single story. I lay on the rug, my chest heaving uselessly. The edges of the room turned black. Through my blurring vision, I looked up. Maria wasn't panicking. She didn't drop her wine glass. She stood tall, towering over my shaking body, casually smoothing out a crease in her red dress. She slowly reached into her designer purse and pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She looked down at me, her eyes dead and cold. She was finally going to make the call. The psychiatric hold was just 3 digits away. The edges of the room turned black. My vision shrank to a tight, suffocating tunnel. My lungs burned frozen completely tight. I lay on the expensive Persian rug, staring up at the blinding crystal chandelier. But I didn't see the glass. I saw hot, cracked asphalt. I was 8 years old again. I had fallen off my bike and torn my knee open to the bone. Blood ran down my shin. I looked up, crying desperately, reaching out for my mother. Maria stood over me, her face twisted in pure disgust. She didn't reach down to help. She just stared at the dirt on my socks and told me I was ruining her afternoon. Lying on the rug 24 years later, I finally understood. That 8-year-old girl, the one who kept hoping her mother would eventually love her, took one last agonizing breath and died. The illusion of family burned away into ash. Maria stood above me now, her thumb hovering over the bright screen of her phone. She opened her mouth, ready to play the victim, ready to tell the crowd her daughter was insane. She never got the chance. A massive shadow ripped through the crowd of silk ties and evening gowns. The sickening smell of vanilla candles was instantly crushed by the scent of sharp sweat and thick wool. Luke Matthews didn't say, "Excuse me." The giant man in the dark suit dropped his shoulder and slammed directly into Maria. The brutal physical impact sent her stumbling backward. Her designer phone clattered across the hardwood floor, sliding under a table. Luke dropped to his knees beside me on the rug. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask what happened. His massive hands grabbed the hem of my black silk dress and tore it straight up the seam. The expensive fabric ripped with a loud, violent shredding noise, exposing the bleeding, indented scar on my calf. He pushed a heavy thumb under my jaw, tilting my head back with rough, practiced precision to force my locked airway open. The 50 guests murmured, taking a collective step back, tightly clutching their champagne glasses. They looked at him like he was an animal. Luke snapped his head up. His voice didn't just fill the room, it shattered it. "Back the hell up, call 911. The roar rattled the picture frames on the walls. The crowd flinched, physically shrinking away from the sheer, overwhelming authority in his voice. Maria stood frozen near the bottom of the stairs. Her face was chalk white. Her perfectly crafted script about a crazy, unhinged daughter was just violently crushed by a federal lawyer who didn't give a damn about her cocktail party. 40 minutes later, the loud mechanical whine of the ambulance siren pierced the night air. Inside the back of the rig, the air conditioning blasted cold air over my damp, freezing skin. Bright LED lights glared off the metal cabinets. Pure, cold oxygen hissed through the clear plastic mask strapped over my nose and mouth. My chest slowly rose. The violent spasm finally broke. Air flooded my burning lungs in a heavy, painful rush. I opened my eyes. I didn't cry. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The panic was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, heavy block of ice in my stomach. Luke sat on the metal bench right across from the stretcher. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, his tie loosened and pulled down. He leaned forward, resting his thick forearms on his knees. He looked at me and gave a single slow nod. The unspoken debt from years ago when I pulled him out of a burning, crushed vehicle overseas was still wide open. I reached up. My calloused fingers grabbed the plastic strap of the oxygen mask. I pulled it down, letting it hang loosely around my neck. I looked him dead in the eye. My voice was a flat, sharp blade. I need you to block my hospital door tomorrow morning. They are coming. 9 o'clock at night. The sharp, stinging smell of rubbing alcohol and bleached cotton sheets filled the cramped hospital room. A heavy metal deadbolt clicked shut with a loud final snap. Emilia, the tired night shift nurse, slid my federal VA identification card back onto the rolling plastic tray. She looked at the blood-stained silk dress piled carelessly in the corner, then looked up at my face. Her demeanor shifted instantly. "Nobody gets through this door," she said, her voice dropping to a low protective murmur. In the far dark corner of the room, Luke stood perfectly still. His suit jacket was gone. He had his thick arms crossed over his chest, his jaw locked tight. He was a massive, silent shadow blocking the only window in the room. I didn't lie back on the pillows. I ignored the throbbing pain shooting up my left calf. I reached into my battered canvas bag and pulled out the cheap, prepaid phone. I pressed the rough plastic buttons. The line connected with a faint crackle of static. "Yeah," Evan answered. I could hear the rapid, muffled clattering of keyboards in the background. My old friends were already awake, sitting in some dark garage, ready to work. "Evan, they moved him," I said. My voice was a flat, dry rasp. "She hid him in an unregulated facility, run her bank statements for the last 24 hours, follow the cash deposits, find that nursing home. Give us an hour," he replied. The line went dead. I turned my head toward Luke. He didn't ask useless questions. He just reached into my bag, pulled out the heavy Panasonic laptop, and handed it to me. I balanced it on my knees and flipped the screen open. The cold blue light washed over my face, reflecting faintly in the dark glass of the hospital window. There was no hesitation this time. No 5-second pause. No memories of an 8-year-old girl in a yellow dress wanting a hug. I opened a blank encrypted email. My calloused fingers moved over the trackpad with mechanical precision. I dragged and dropped the files one by one. The bank statements from 7 fake shell companies, 14 forged loan signatures. The fake psychiatric evaluation Maria paid for to lock me in a ward and drain my accounts. I typed in the direct email address for the federal investigators. I stared at the blinking cursor. My chest ached with every shallow breath, but my mind was completely clear. I was done being the bleeding victim in a house built on my own stolen paychecks. 5:45 in the morning. The sky outside the window turned a bruised, ugly shade of purple. The burner phone vibrated hard against the plastic tray. One text message from Evan. "Got the address. We are heading there now." I stared at the glowing green text. I reached down, grabbed the edge of the clear medical tape on the back of my hand, and ripped the IV line straight out. The needle slid out of my vein, leaving a single dark drop of blood smudged across my knuckles. I swung my bare legs over the side of the hospital bed. I walked over to the corner, picked up the ruined, blood-soaked silk evening gown, and dropped it straight into the red biohazard trash can. I pulled on my heavy, faded cargo pants. I shoved my feet into my scuffed leather boots, pulling the thick laces tight enough to dig into my skin. I smoothed down the rough collar of my olive green shirt. The heavy fabric felt right. I was done playing the broken rich daughter. Out in the quiet hallway, the elevator dinged. Heavy, rapid footsteps echoed loudly against the linoleum floor. the sharp, arrogant clicking of designer stiletto heels, the booming, aggressive voice of a man in a cheap suit demanding the nurses step aside. They were here. Maria brought her lawyer. I looked down at the glowing laptop screen resting on the bed. My rough, calloused index finger hovered over the keyboard for a fraction of a second. I pressed enter. 10 in the morning. The hospital room door slammed against the drywall with a violent crack. Maria marched in wearing a sharp beige blazer. Jessica followed closely behind, chewing nervously on her thumbnail. Beside them stood a man in a cheap, poorly fitted gray suit. He held up a thick stack of papers stamped with bright red ink. A state-issued medical conservatorship. I need her restrained, the lawyer ordered loudly, looking toward the empty hospital bed. I stepped out from behind the blue privacy curtain. I wasn't wearing a thin paper hospital gown. I wore my heavy leather boots, faded cargo pants, and a stiff olive green shirt. I stood perfectly straight, my hands resting loosely at my sides. I looked at the three of them like they were trash left on the sidewalk. The lawyer opened his mouth to speak. From the dark corner of the room, a heavy metal deadbolt clicked shut. Luke stepped into the harsh fluorescent light. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He pulled a heavy metal badge from his jacket pocket and held it up. Federal Counsel. Luke said, his voice a low rumbling threat. Suspend your local civil order. She is under an active federal investigation. Anyone who interferes with her autonomy right now will be placed in federal cuffs for obstruction of justice. The lawyer's face drained of color. His hand trembled. The thick stack of red-stamped papers slipped from his grip, fluttering uselessly onto the cold linoleum floor. At 7:45 that same morning, miles away, the cheap hollow core door of room 204 splintered completely off its hinges. Inside the dark, unregulated nursing home, a man in a dirty white coat held a syringe filled with cheap sedatives standing over my father. Evan didn't say a word. He grabbed the man by the collar and slammed him violently against the drywall. Evan stepped over the mess, grabbed the handles of my dad's wheelchair, and flashed a small smile. Lauren says hello, Evan said. Let's get you out of this dump. Back in the hospital room, the air was dead silent. I walked over to the aluminum tray table. I slammed a thick stack of printed bank statements down onto the metal surface. The sharp smack made Jessica flinch. 7 fake shell companies. 14 forged signatures. I picked up the remote and clicked on the wall-mounted TV. A clear photo filled the screen. It was my dad. He was sitting in a bright, clean room at the local VA medical center, drinking a cup of hot tea. He held up a brand-new signed medical proxy. I looked right into Maria's eyes. He's gone, I said, my voice dead flat. And your money laundering files are currently sitting on a desk at the FBI. There is nothing more pathetic than watching a toxic person realize they have completely lost control. If you have ever watched a manipulator's mask slip, the second they get caught, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Tell me in the comments who did they immediately try to blame when the truth finally came out. I read every single one. The word FBI hung heavily in the stale air. Jessica's face went completely white. The expensive designer bag slipped off her shoulder, hitting the floor. She didn't even hesitate. She stepped away from Maria, pointing a shaking finger directly at her mother's face. It was her! Jessica screamed, her voice cracking in pure panic. I didn't do anything. She made me sign those papers. Maria shrieked, her perfect composure shattering into a million jagged pieces. She lunged forward, grabbing violently at Jessica's wrist to shut her up. The polished high society mother and her spoiled daughter were instantly tearing at each other like cornered rats in a trap. I didn't smile. I didn't feel a shred of pity. I just turned my back on them, pushed the heavy wooden door open, and walked out into the quiet hallway. The hospital parking garage smelled like stale motor oil, damp concrete, and cheap exhaust fumes. The air down here was thick and heavy. Above me, a row of cheap fluorescent tubes flickered, buzzing with a dull, constant electrical hum. I walked slowly toward my dark SUV. My heavy boots echoed loudly against the pavement. Luke walked a few feet behind me. He didn't say a word. He just moved like a massive silent wall, keeping my back covered. Maria lunged from behind a gray cement pillar. She didn't walk. She collapsed. She dropped to her hands and knees right in front of my boots, landing heavily in a dark, slick puddle of leaked transmission fluid. The expensive nylon of her sheer pantyhose tore open instantly against the rough cement. The polished, arrogant hostess from last night was completely gone. Thick black mascara ran down her cheeks in messy, ugly streaks, settling into the deep wrinkles she usually paid thousands of dollars to hide. Her designer phone vibrated frantically inside her clenched fist. A relentless buzzing rhythm, automated text alerts. The federal investigators were freezing every single bank account tied to her name, one by one. 10 feet away, Jessica hid half her body behind the concrete pillar. She chewed nervously on her acrylic thumbnail, her eyes wide and terrified. She didn't dare step forward. Luke shifted his massive frame, stepping slightly to the side to block her line of sight. Jessica shrank back into the shadows. "Lauren, I'm sorry," Maria sobbed. Her shrill voice echoed harshly off the low concrete ceiling. She gasped for air, forcing heavy dramatic tears from her eyes. "Tell them to drop it. Tell the investigators it was a misunderstanding. I'm your mother, I gave birth to you. Are you really going to let them put me in prison?" I looked down at her. I didn't feel the familiar heavy ache in my chest. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I just felt completely entirely empty. I stared at the dark, dirty motor oil soaking into the sleeves of her expensive beige blazer. The overwhelming smell of her rich vanilla perfume mixed with the scent of garbage and gasoline. It was sickening. "You aren't crying because you hurt me," I said. My voice was a hollow, flat rasp. "You aren't crying because of what you did to Dad. You are crying because they just took your crystal chandelier," Maria wailed. It was a loud, ugly sound. She lunged forward, desperate to maintain control. She reached out, trying to dig her sharp, manicured nails into the thick fabric of my cargo pants. She aimed her hands right at my left leg, the exact same leg she had intentionally stomped on 12 hours ago to make me stop breathing. I didn't step back. The deep cut under my pants throbbed with a dull, hot ache. I shifted my weight, driving my heavy boot into the cement, and used that exact injured calf to shove her hand away. My leg pushed hard against her diamond rings, knocking her arm aside. The movement was sharp, dismissive, like brushing off a piece of dirty trash. Maria froze, staring up at me with wide, panicked eyes. The crocodile tears stopped completely. She realized the manipulation was dead. "The feds are on their way to your house right now," I said, staring down at her ruined face. "Pack a bag." I turned my back on her. I grabbed the heavy metal handle of my SUV, pulled the door open, and climbed into the driver's seat. I gripped the thick leather steering wheel. I grabbed the door panel and pulled it hard. Slam. The automatic locks engaged with a heavy metallic click. Total silence. The thick glass completely cut off the sound of her screaming. I turned the key in the ignition. The heavy V8 engine roared to life, shaking the floorboards. I shoved the gear shift into drive. The thick tires screeched sharply against the cement as I hit the gas, driving straight toward the exit ramp, leaving her kneeling in the dirt. The ramp out of the parking garage was steep. I pushed the gas pedal and the heavy SUV broke through the shadows, rolling out into the blinding, warm morning sunlight of Northern Virginia. My phone rang, a quiet, simple tone vibrating against the center console. I picked it up. "Yeah." "Lauren?" My dad's voice came through the speaker. It sounded completely different. The wet, heavy wheezing was gone. His breathing was clear, steady, and calm. "The doctors here at the VA hospital took a look at my chest. The fluid is finally draining. They said I'm going to be okay." He paused. I could hear the faint, comforting beep of a heart monitor in his room. "Thank you, kid," he whispered. "Get some rest, Dad," I said. I ended the call and dropped the phone onto the passenger seat. For the first time in 36 days, the corner of my mouth pulled up into a very small, quiet smile. I reached down to the cup holder and picked up a paper cup. The cardboard was cheap and flimsy, burning my fingertips slightly. I took a slow sip. It was black coffee from a corner gas station. No sugar, no milk. Bitter, burnt, and rough. It tasted exactly like the stuff my friends and I used to boil in tin cups on cold mornings overseas. It tasted perfect. I took a deep breath. My lungs expanded fully, pulling in clean, cool air through the open window. There was no tightness in my chest, no panic. The heavy, suffocating smell of expensive vanilla candles was completely gone, blown away by the wind rushing past the glass. I was cleared. The federal investigators had everything they needed. Suddenly, a loud, piercing siren ripped through the quiet morning air. I glanced up. In the opposite lane, heading straight back toward the wealthy suburbs I had just left, a motorcade came tearing down the road. Three massive, matte black armored trucks roared past me. Bright red and blue lights flashed wildly off their heavy steel grills. The thick yellow letters and the side panels were impossible to miss. Federal agents. The heavy wind from their speed rocked my SUV slightly as they blew past. They were heading directly for the garish yellow McMansion. Maria and Jessica were probably still in the basement, screaming at each other, waiting for the heavy knock on that thick oak door. Karma had finally arrived, wearing a badge and carrying handcuffs. I didn't turn my head. I didn't look in the rearview mirror to watch them go. I just reached over, turned the radio down to a low hum, and pressed my boot a little harder against the gas pedal. The scar on my left calf throbbed slightly, a dull, familiar ache reminding me of the blood I had left on that Persian rug. Let it ache. The wound was real, but the 8-year-old girl who had spent her entire life begging for her mother's love was finally gone. She had been replaced by someone who knew exactly what she was worth. Family isn't built on blood. Blood just makes you related. Family is built by the people who show up when you have nothing left. The people who kick down a heavy wooden door to pull your father out of a dark room. The people who stand in front of a crowd of 50 strangers and roar until the world stops spinning. I kept my hands steady on the leather steering wheel. I drove straight ahead, leaving the wreckage entirely behind me. Thank you so much for riding out this journey with me until the very end. Your support, your comments, and your shared stories mean the absolute world to me. We all have scars, but we don't have to let the people who gave them to us dictate the rest of our lives. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next story.